in January. There you go. Was on January 23rd. And it is available on the SSBA website and our YouTube channel. So all the sessions will be available to share with others and to watch again if you'd like, and for those who aren't able to attend. So an official welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining the second school food speaker series in our series. Um, and this session is about supporting Indigenous well-being, cultures, and education through school food programs. And we have four excellent speakers here today to share their experiences and knowledge and provide an overview of some supportive tools and policy frameworks for this in this area. And I want to also acknowledge that I am on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, Saskatchewan, and that Saskatchewan is covered by Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, and the lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Dene, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis Nation. All people in Saskatchewan are beneficiaries of these treaties. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories, and we acknowledge the harm and mistakes of the past and are committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I hope that today we can listen with open ears and hearts to our speakers and with an intention of learning and to continue to improve our work and relationships with each other through the beauty and nourishment of food, as well as school food programs in our communities and all they can offer everybody, including our Indigenous youth and children in this province. And there's a lot of work to be done to work in supportive relationships towards this effort. And this session is also here in acknowledgement of all of the wonderful and innovative and leading work that First Nations peoples in Saskatchewan are leading in school food program development. As you see here, the whole series is entitled Eating Well in Saskatchewan, a school food program development series. And it would be amiss to not feature the really excellent innovative work that is being led by Indigenous communities here. We have a lot to learn from their efforts across the province. So I hope that there is a lot of good sharing and knowledge that can be built from today, and that we can be thankful and appreciate and show gratitude for the work that is being led with challenges and difficulties and a lot of beauty and a lot of impact for our youth and children. So the speaker series, just a quick background, it really came about in 2023, the 27 locally elected school boards in Saskatchewan. They adopted a resolution to advocate with the Canadian School Boards Association for the development of healthy, universal, cost-shared school food programs funded by the federal and provincial governments in consultation with school boards. As many as you know, in our last session covered was about the national school food policy that was recently announced by the federal government in 2024. And with this policy came a commitment of $1 billion of funding over 5 years. And so the speaker series in general, which it's January, we had one in January, yeah, it's still February, February and March, and then we will meet again at the beginning of May, is really to recognize and discuss school food programs that in this timely in this time. And we are still waiting in anticipation for the Saskatchewan government to sign on to the national school food policy for the additional and needed funding to support school food programs in children and youth in this province. And time is running out. So the intention of this school food speaker series is to bring these partners across the province to learn together and to make connections in school food programming, and to continue to bring awareness to the necessity of these programs as essential parts of our communities. The speaker series intends to bring presenters that cover information related to school food governance, research, and best practice, with an emphasis on featuring local Saskatchewan projects and speakers. And so I'm so grateful and happy that we have our speakers here today. I'm going to introduce them, and we will move towards getting into the presentations. We are here today from 1:30 to 3 p.m. and I think it's Central Standard Time in Saskatchewan if you're coming from outside of Saskatchewan. And each presenter is going to be presenting somewhere around 20 or 25 minutes or so with questions at the end. You can feel free, and we invite comments and questions in the chat box, but it is likely most will be addressed at the end when we'll leave, about 15-20 minutes for further questions. So I'd like just to introduce our featured speakers today. I'm going to introduce them all right here. So listen carefully, and then they'll each present individually. So our first speaker today will be Felice McKay. And Felice is the SSBA, a strategic advisor for Indigenous education. She has almost 2 decades of experience in public administration and Indigenous education policy. Her focus is on providing Indigenous education services in support of the SSBA strategic plan and the Indigenous constituency. Felice's presentation will highlight Saskatchewan's Indigenous education policy frameworks and how they can support school food development. And we're so happy to have her today. And as I was reading her bio, I remembered I actually didn't introduce myself. Sorry, but my name is Kaylee, and I am going to moderate and host this session. I'm also here representing the SSBA as a school food programs researcher. I'm also a registered dietitian, and I'm completing my PhD with the University of Saskatchewan under Dr. Rachel Engler-Stringer, and we've been doing lots of research focusing on school food program policy and development in Canada. And so that's where I'm coming from today as hosting this through the SSBA and supporting the advocacy work through the SSBA and their School Food Roundtable. And when I started at the SSBA a few months ago, really taking a look at some of the fabulous work that they have done around Indigenous education, my eyes really lit up about what are some of the connections that could be made with school food programs. And I was so happy for Felice to agree to come share the work that's being done, that has been done with the SSBA, and to bring that into the conversation about school food programs in the province. So thank you, Felice. Our next speaker after Felice will be Tammy Shikako, Stephanie Foster, as well as Barb Hanna. Their presentation will flow nicely together. But Tammy is a dietitian working with the Meadow Lake Tribal Council in the Community Nutrition Program. Tammy is passionate about working with schools to develop strong school food programs and will share how Meadow Lake First Nations schools reassess their school food programs as part of the School Food Development Project in partnership with the University of Saskatchewan. And I really hope that you can take away a lot from Tammy's project. It's a really interesting contribution to what ways in which we can work with school food programs at larger scales and systematic levels and evaluate and pilot. So thank you, Tammy, so much for joining us. And Stephanie Foster, who, if you were here a month ago, she also spoke briefly about a community consultation guide. But Stephanie is a person of all tricks and trades, and I was also here to speak about the School Food Development Project with Tammy from her perspective working in Saskatoon with urban schools around school food development. And Stephanie is a former teacher and is currently working as project manager for the University of Saskatchewan School Food Research Projects. And then lastly, we have Barb Hanna, and welcome, Barb. She is the principal of Clearwater River Dene School in Saskatchewan's north. School food programs, food sovereignty, and food security are all priorities in her community. Her presentation will highlight how the school and the tribal council work collaboratively to find positive and creative initiatives that work toward ensuring the youth and the community have positive, varied, and healthy experiences with food. So welcome so much, and thank you for having us. Thank you for being here today with us, Barb. I'm going to now stop sharing my screen, and I would invite Felice to bring up her presentation, and we'll flow into our series of presentations.
Great, thanks. Great, thanks. Please excuse my voice. I'm kind of in a bit of a sickness at the moment, but we'll work through that as we go on. Okay, so let me just take a look at the time so I don't get, sometimes I can be a little long-winded. Okay, moving on. So thank you, Kaylee, for that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Felice McKay. I'm the strategic advisor at the SSBA. A little bit further about me. I'm a member of the George Gordon First Nation, just north of Regina here. And as Kaylee has said, I've spent a lot of time working in Indigenous education and in policy. What I'm here to talk about today, though, really, though, is to look at some policy frameworks that we have related to Indigenous education in the province, and really just to, I guess, stimulate some thought. I welcome discussions in the chat, and really looking at how these can support school food programs or what connections could be made. So as we go through some of these documents, kind of looking at them with the school food program lens, and we'll be able to see some of those as I start going through here. So just want to start out, I guess, with probably the main document. And I don't know, some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not be. But the Ministry of Education has a document and it's called Inspiring Success. And it's the First Nations and Métis pre-K to 12 education policy framework. And really what that is the umbrella policy for all Indigenous education actions in the provincial school divisions. And so you can find this on their website as well. Um, some pieces, I guess, more interesting pieces of it. So really, what is it? So when you speak to the vision of it, it's really about placing Indigenous knowledge, systems, cultures, and languages all throughout the education system, and really to ensure that the system benefits all learners. So looking at um, moving away from education for Indigenous students to education that's created with Indigenous people for Indigenous students. And really, it supports, excuse me, all aspects of reconciliation, treaty education, Indigenous culture and language, and the infusion of Indigenous perspectives and ways of knowing into renewed curricula to benefit all learners. But again, taking that back and thinking about how this can connect to school food. So I can already start to see some of these connections and how that works with the particular supporting Indigenous culture and Indigenous traditional foods, or, a knowledge transfer, learning from intergenerational teaching. And so there's lots of things that can come of that. And so here's the conceptual framework of the Inspiring Success, and this was created when the Inspiring Success was created. And really, at the base of the cycle of lifelong learning, speaks to land, languages, and culture and relationships, and really as the foundation or the base for lifelong learning. And again, thinking about how that land and food off the land and the connection to language and culture, and relationships too. So when we're thinking about the policy framework itself, and then even backing it up a little bit to, there's 5 policy goals located within the policy framework. So the policy framework document itself is quite long. It has policy imperatives at the beginning of the document. So really the why of why we should be, working towards these policy goals. And then on page 14 and 15, it starts to talk about the policy goals here. And so when we start to look at these policy goals, thinking about, I mean, I'm sure you can see them when you're working if you're working in Indigenous education, or even if you're not, and you're working in school food, where that connection is. So, I mean, starting at the top, so worldviews of First Nations and the Métis Nations. So, how can school food programs or school food initiatives support that? Absolutely, they can. Moving into equitable opportunities and outcomes for First Nations and Métis learners. And I'm sure, once again, there's a connection there to that through the use of school food programs and, um, you know, options, I guess. There's options how you could connect the school food programs in your areas to this framework here. And this number three is shared management of the provincial education system by ensuring respectful and equitable partnerships with First Nations and Métis people at a provincial and at the local level. So, what that really speaks to, again, is that co-creation or co-development of programs and that shared responsibility. So, again, it's working together. So, thinking about how if you had a school food program or you wanted to develop one in a provincial school, thinking about how could you tie these pieces to that. So right there, that shared management. So working together with your local at the local level, First Nations or your Métis locals, to talk about what's happening and what could be done. The next one is the culturally appropriate and authentic assessment measures. Really, probably not as relevant as the other four. But the last one is First Nations and Métis languages and cultures are valued and supported. And again, certainly linkages there to not only developing, co-creating these school food programs with local First Nations and Métis peoples in your area, but also how to support that. So, through teaching language and through cultural activities when it comes to, if you're doing traditional foods, you could be doing that, or you could just be I could just be part of it, right? So there's lots of different ways when you look at these policy goals, how even though not necessarily directed to school food programming, there certainly is linkages and connections that could be made, and there you can support the Inspiring Success Policy Framework through school food programming. And I guess that's just the point that I wanted to make too. And so where Inspiring Success came from is there was an original, it was created first originally in 2009, and then it was renewed in 2018. And then in 2022, the SSBA created another framework, and that is the Indigenous Education Responsibility Framework. And where did that, so again, another framework, but really building on the previous work and what it is. Inspiring Success was the catalyst for this. And where this came from was boards of education and trustees really wanted to support strategic improvement planning for Indigenous education. And to really bring to life Inspiring Success and those policy goals. And so what we were seeing to align at not only efforts, but also all levels. So what we were seeing previously was lots of people doing things in the name of Indigenous education, but it was kind of it was so broad. And so in order to kind of focus it and narrow it, the Indigenous Education Responsibility Framework was created. And the people that created the document it was almost all Indigenous peoples, but it included trustees and SSBA senior staff. It had senior administrators from professional associations such as Leeds and SASBO and STF, and ministry senior executives, and then also school division personnel who had, lifelong Indigenous supporters of Indigenous education. So if you want to find the IERF, I told you where to find Inspiring Success, but if you want to find the Indigenous Education Responsibility Framework, if you just go to the SSBA, the Saskatchewan School, or I guess Sask schoolboards.ca, and at the top there's a thing that says services, and you scroll down to Indigenous education. And so, really, what is it? So, originally, it was created as a self-assessment and reflection tool to support school divisions when they're not only creating, but planning and evaluating their Indigenous education activities. And again, going back to that, realizing that funding for Indigenous education was not increasing and was not likely to increasing. So, in order to have a more coordinated effort, in terms of working towards achieving those policy goals. That's where this document, the IERF, came for. What also is interesting about it is so it can be used at all levels. And so boards can use it as a tool for strategic planning in order to gauge where they are, and again, to support governance as well, too, but to see where they are in Indigenous education and then make some decisions on where to move forward because we're not going to be able to do everything all at once. So, taking a look at what you're already doing in Indigenous education and then focusing that based on where you want to move those resources. So depending on what you're doing in your strategic plan or what you have for staffing, or so looking at that as well. We continue to work with the Ministry of Education to talk about using it as a measure in the provincial education plan for the Inspiring Success priority, but also for school division annual reports. So, using it to focus the work of inspiring success, but really to work towards achieving those policy goals. Oh, here's where it is. I guess I had the slide backwards. This is where it is when you're on the SSBA. There's all the pieces about it, if you're not familiar with that. So, what are the goals of the IERF? And really, for people throughout the organization to reflect on where they are and to give insights into making positive changes in their systems. And we're talking about real change too, not surface level change. We're talking about systemic change and really addressing some of those pieces that the things that really will make a difference. And so it should encourage individuals to evaluate and shift behaviors and practice based on the feedback and the benchmarks that are provided in the framework. So within our framework, we have multiple pieces, multiple stepping stones. Each policy goal is broken down into stepping stones. So there's these stepping stones, and then there's a continuum of where you are on the in the continuum as well. And what does it do is it allows for consistent growth and progress and really fosters development of the conditions needed for ongoing dialogue through an ethical space of engagement. And again, looking at policies and processes that are in place, building relationships with Indigenous communities in the at the local level, and then working together to co-create and co-construct new policies and processes. So it's not so much about and it's an add-on. It's about really looking at it and digging deep into what could be done and having that really important too of having that Indigenous voice while doing it. Oh, I guess that's all I have on that. Kind of went fast, but I guess that was 15 minutes. So anyways, just wanted to get on here really to, I guess, intro some of the policy frameworks and an opportunity to get people thinking about how their work in school food and even your particular role and how that connects to the Inspiring Success Policy Framework. And to give a little introduction about the IERF because it is a little bit new-ish. And so not everyone may be familiar with it. So, and I welcome questions in the chat or later on about either of those two pieces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felice. I'm not before working with SSB, I wasn't very familiar with either of those frameworks. And I think that as we're developing and talking about school food programs at in the province that reflecting on those policy frameworks that already exist, school boards are using or familiar with, there's expectations around them, that beginning to look at them and how school food programs fit in those connections that you mentioned is going to be really important in ensuring school food programs are meeting goals of supporting Indigenous health, well-being, and education. So thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to move next to Tammy to talk about the school food development project that occurred with the Meadow Lake Tribal Council 2 years ago. Tammy will tell you more in recently. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm just gonna share screen. All right. So can you guys see that okay? Good. All right, so I just wanted to thank the Saskatchewan School Board Association for inviting me today. It's exciting to be able to share some of what I've been involved in through my work with the Meadow Lake Tribal Council and Meadow Lake First Nations. And so I'm going to just share a little bit about the school food development project, as well as my role as MLTC dietitian working in community nutrition program. And then we're going to move through uh, with Stephanie. Stephanie will provide the urban perspective, and then Barb is going to wrap things up with the local food, local school perspective as well. So we're going to kind of we're building our presentation together. And I just want to let you know that the project oh, I don't know if it's allowing me to advance my slides now. There we go. So just for your perspective, the Meadow Lake Tribal Council and Meadow Lake First Nation area is kind of it's located in the northwest of the province of Saskatchewan on Treaty 6, 8, and 10. And that is the homeland of the Cree and Dene, as well as the Métis. So if that gives you a little bit of a geographic perspective as to where we're located. My involvement with the school food development project started in 2022. It was a 2-year project. And so I had been working with the Meadow Lake Tribal Council as a dietitian and then moved into a project management role along with Stephanie Foster. So this was a project that was funded by the Population Health Agency of Canada Design Phase Funding. And it was a collaboration among the University of Saskatchewan, the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, Saskatoon School Board, and it involved 9 schools from Meadow Lake First Nation communities, as well as 3 Saskatoon schools. And the aim of the project was basically to understand more about what makes an ideal school food project, or what makes an ideal school food program. And then from an MLTC perspective, we also wanted to understand more what's unique about Indigenous communities and what are some of the things that are already going on, because we know that Indigenous communities have had some really good and strong school food programming long before this project. Okay, so one of the things that I thought was really important about the way that the project was set up was that it highlighted a co-design model, which was really great because what it meant was that we had respectful relationships in designing the project. We followed OCAP principles for research, and so OCAP principles basically stands for ownership, control, access, and possession. And it refers to the First Nations control over the data that is collected, the collection process, and how it's owned and controlled, and who has access to that information. And so what that does is it also helps to build in practices that do support relationship building, and that are very respectful and form a really strong basis for collaboration. So what we did in order to ensure that we had a really respectful process is that um, we we looked for consent from all the levels of organization. We looked for leadership consent to engage in the project in the community. We involved the schools, school division, MLTC education levels. We involved the administrators at the schools, elders and community, and of course, staff and students in the school. Um, so we obtained consent from the community in general, but also every participant. And we involved the MLTC education in reviewing and editing our tools and resources to ensure that they were culturally safe and appropriate. And then we discussed how we would go about handling information, um, how it would be used and shared. And then what we did was we shared our information with the community. Every time we learned something new through the project, we would share it back to community, and that would continually drive what we were doing and what we were trying to achieve. So we were consulting the community in our decisions as we went. And so I think that that built a really strong relationship. And also, I think it's also a really good framework for working in community in general. So one of the things we wanted to do was to understand what school food programs we're already doing and identify opportunities for growth. And I just want to acknowledge that my work occurred over 2 years with this project, but schools were already engaging in really strong programming. And so what we were doing is exploring and trying to understand what they were doing, what schools thought their strengths were, what their vision was, and maybe trying to understand some of the challenges and barriers that they may have faced so that we could sort of understand the school food program a lot better. So we also use some tools. So we use the online surveys. We had surveyed students, staff, and community members to get a really good feel for what everyone's vision was. And then we also wanted more feedback from students. So we used some focus groups to get student feedback. And then we also did interviews, and this was with school staff, and that included teachers, administrators, cooks, land-based program staff, anyone involved in school food programming that the school identified that we should interview. And so we did learn a lot about what the schools were already doing, and some of the strengths of their programming included their land, language, relationships, and culture programming, which basically had students on the land learning about tradition and culture. And a lot of that did overlap with food programming because a lot of traditional practice involves food programming. Okay, so what we learned from schools, one of the things we learned was that schools were providing really incredible school food programming, and they were running a lot of this programming out of like home ec style kitchens. And so having commercial equipment was identified as a really important thing. Schools wanted to be able to manage like bulk purchasing of food and food storage because of how far schools are from major centers. When they purchase, they tried to purchase in bulk, but then faced issues in storing that food. And their ability to store in refrigeration or frozen commercial equipment would improve also the quality of food that they could keep in the school. So upgrading equipment they also face challenges with that because they found that they needed to upgrade, say, electrical or plumbing, and those were challenges in older schools as well. Schools wanted sustainable programming, and this meant that they wanted sustainability in the form of budgets. Schools were finding they're spending a lot of time applying for funds, applying for grants, and that those grants or funds are not continued from year to year. And so each year they're reevaluating where they're going to fund their programs. So they were really strong in their desire for long-term sustainable funding. Schools wanted to be environmental stewards, so they talked a lot about, you know, recycling or composting or getting away from disposable dishware, going for more reusable dishware, and that meant, for the sake of saving cooks time, also commercial dishwashers that can wash a lot of dishes in a short amount of time. From a sustainability standpoint, schools also wanted more local and traditional food on the menu. And then that leads into a conversation about quality food. So one of the things that schools, the staff and students alike, the community, everybody could agree that they did want quality food on the menu in schools, but that they did face challenges in achieving this. So I remember clearly one of the cooks saying, you know, when the budgets are limited, the first thing that comes off the menu is high quality fruits, vegetables, and other ingredients like that, because the focus shifts from quality food to how many students can we feed with the budget we have. And so that meant that some of those quality foods would naturally just be dropped off the menu in an effort to feed more students. From a quality perspective, sometimes if students weren't used to certain foods, introducing new foods could be an issue, or the cooks might express a struggle between sort of that desire to please everybody, what, you know, likes and dislikes, student desires, community desires, and balancing all of that, which did contribute to stress on cooks as well. And then, of course, when you transport food, say from major centers to the end of rural roads, a lot of times there's issues with quality of food on arrival. And so sometimes they might describe that food maybe froze in the trucks on the way while it was being delivered, or maybe that food wasn't of great quality by the time it had been transported such distances, or it couldn't be kept long enough because you might do a delivery every so often, but by the time you're re-delivering, some of that food is degrading in its quality. So transportation and distance affected the quality as well. When it comes to staffing, schools were really clear. Cooks are really important parts of the school. The school spoke really fondly of the relationships that they have with the cooks, that they take care of the students, that they cook with love, and that school food was like a family. Eating together was important. And so recruiting and retaining skilled cooks that have all of these, the capacity to also cook for large groups of students, retaining and recruiting school staff is sometimes challenging. And then, of course, centering culture is really important. Or sorry, that brings me to the centering culture. So both students and staff did agree that it is really important to make sure that the learning for students is connected to culture, and that they also expressed a desire to have more local and traditional foods on the menu so that students could see the foods that they recognized from their traditional lands in the school food menu. And then one of the really important things that students said was that seeing those foods and having those foods did help them feel more connected to their culture. And we think that that's also very important. So student needs were also central. So students did appreciate and value quality food. And students agreed that it was really important to feed everybody. They didn't want anyone to sort of go without. And the schools generally prioritized universal school options, so they didn't want to stigmatize students by having some have access while others didn't. During our focus groups, students were really excited to share their opinions and ideas around what they thought. And then schools likewise were really happy to know that their programming was supporting student needs and that they could also engage students in assisting in planning school food programs. So the type and quality of food is important to students and staff alike. Common barriers for schools were obviously funding, which I mentioned, the equipment and infrastructure for storing large amounts of foods, and especially if they had to bulk purchase. A lot of schools were having their cooks drive um, more than an hour and even up to 3 hours to go to large centers to buy um, food that was lower priced rather than having it delivered. So we did look at some of the delivery as well inside our program. So much of what the schools told us in the surveys and interviews that was really meaningful and important to them did also align with the 6 characteristics of effective school food programs, as well as the 7 pillars of food sovereignty. And so in Meadow Lake First Nation communities, they placed a large importance on community and then the value of connecting community into the school food programming and ensuring everybody was fed. So they focused a lot on traditional and cultural foods, as well as the connection that these foods bring to the land, the connection of elders and knowledge keepers inside the school, local harvesters. And so this was also part of their discussions on sustainability and how to build a local food supply so that maybe schools would be less reliant on foods that are traveling long distance before they enter their community. And then following these principles is basically a really nice starting point, I would say, for any school that's wanting to develop school food programs. And what we learned is it's really important to listen really well to community needs and then to develop programs that build on the strengths that they already have, as well as the vision and interests that they have as well. So those were good starting points. And then I just want to show you just a few examples of some of the things that schools were doing. So here's some pictures from one of the schools that offers, like, they have a long time hot lunch program. And during the project 2 years, one of their focuses was to get more fresh produce in the school. So they were working with their local grocer. They had a grocer unit, which is an indoor growing unit, and they were able to grow a lot of lettuce in that unit. And you can see here the bags of lettuce that were brought from the grocery unit. And so the school was doing a weekly salad bar using this lettuce. And then they were using some of the program funds to add extra fruits to their menu. You can see kind of also in this picture, in the background, you can see that they've got these really great stainless steel tables. So adding little bits of commercial equipment help them with processing food in the kitchen. I believe this school has about 200 students, maybe 250 students. So cooking and portioning and serving using commercial equipment really helped with efficiency in the kitchen. We did these are just a few highlights, I guess. I can't cover everything that the schools were doing. And of course, these are some of the celebrations in the school, but we had done, one of the schools had a lunch program, but it was a paid program. So students had to pay to purchase food, but they wanted to experiment with something that was universal. So they added a universal snack for 6 weeks to their program to see what the cost would be, what food delivery would be like if they were to also have the food delivered to the community instead of driving out to get it. And so you can see a picture here where they had made muffins and yogurt parfaits, I believe, were the snacks. So that was like quite a comprehensive snack with, 2 to 3 different types of foods at each snack. And we also wanted to understand what the cost would be. And we found that over the course of the 6 weeks, the snacks were about $1.42 on average. And the snacks were really well received. The delivery went well, and they used the delivery trucks. The local store would keep the food, and then the school would go to the local store and bring the food across to the school. But then once the school got some of their commercial freezers and fridges, they were able to store more produce on site. So storing produce on site was important to the schools. Okay, and then a lot of the schools also have gardening or growing projects. So here's a few pictures. You can see some of the schools have fenced in-ground gardens. Some have raised beds. You can see one of the schools has a greenhouse. And there was 3 communities that have indoor grocer units. And in the corner, you can see the inside of one of the grocer units where they're growing lettuce and fresh produce. And that's also an economic development for the community as well. So this is a really nice community connection. And one of the things that made the project really work well in Meadow Lake First Nations is the schools and the community are always collaborating and working together. And so that did make some of our projects get off the ground a lot faster. From a land, language, relationships, and culture programming are already existing in the school. So this was not something we added, but what we recognized was the importance of this programming and how it connects with school food really well. You can see this Clearwater River School was doing dried meat one day when we were there. So they had done a moose harvest, I believe, and were preparing the meat for drying. And then some of the other pictures here are different ways the schools have built dried meat or smokehouses into their school grounds or their traditional grounds. So after the project, we had identified, that some sustainable food sources were of interest and the land-based programming is already really strong. So MLTC Nutrition Program collaborated with 4 schools this past year to do buffalo harvests. So we created a steering committee and we worked together with the school staff, the land-based staff, administrators, and then some of the MLTC health staff, like environmental health officers, the dietitians, youth and elder program, and also some elders from Meadow Lake Tribal Council as well as Meadow Lake First Nations to do the buffalo harvests. And I think this was our first one. This was Clearwater River, was the first to participate in the buffalo harvest. And what this does is it also provides like a sustainable food source that also has historic connection to many of the communities, and also is a really nice land-based program. So this has been successful and we're hoping to expand this to other communities as well. And you'll learn more about the land-based programming when Barb does her presentation. So that brings my summary of some of the highlights of the Meadow Lake First Nation and MLTC education school food programming. So I'll just turn it over to Steph.
Thanks, Tammy. You can advance the slide for me. That'd be great. So I don't want to take up too much time, but because Tammy really did a great descriptor of our project. I miss working with her. We were quite the dynamic duo, I think. So I worked with the Saskatoon schools on the project, and we had 3 of them, as was mentioned, 2 elementary schools and a high school. Our high school had quite a low Indigenous population actually, but was located on a site that used to be a traditional Métis garden. So they had an Indigenous connection that we really wanted to utilize. One of the elementary schools has a Métis language program and offers some land-based education for older students. And the other school had almost perfectly 1/3 Caucasian, 1/3 new Canadian, and 1/3 immigrant kids. or pardon me, Indigenous kids. So the school compositions were vastly different. And we did focus on, or pardon me, we did do a lot of development of just the food programs in general, trying to make them more universal, trying to sort out service, trying to reduce costs, getting enough equipment in the kitchens to really streamline processes. But I thought the interesting piece here was the work that we did around cultural learning and traditional food. So that's what I thought we would focus on here today. So from the urban perspective, we faced a couple of different challenges than the Meadow Lake Tribal Council schools, which I'm sure some of you will run into the same sort of barriers if you're working in an urban context. So first, with a much more diverse student body. The MLTC communities tend to be pretty homogenous with, Dene, Cree, Métis kids. Again, the Saskatoon schools, much more diverse. This leads to challenges such as halal diets having to be accommodated for. And then there's lots of advantages too with multicultural families. There's lots of other food cultures to be shared in the school. There's lots of parents with skills that they want to bring into the school from their home countries. And so the diversity offers lots of challenges and opportunities in terms of school food. There were fewer allowances for us for wild meats. And this is one thing where I think if you're working in an urban school and you want to do more traditional food programming, this would be a great place for advocacy. The rules around traditional meats wild meats are pretty strict in terms of food safety standards. And those are taken into account pretty heavily in the city anyway. Because Meadow Lake Tribal Council is Indigenous, they have processes in place for allowing, wild meat to come into the school, and they trust the folks in their community to harvest it. And those close connections aren't available in the city, and so it makes working with wild meat much more frustrating, frankly. So Saskatoon Public School in particular the kids have less access to camps, land-based education, cultural instruction. Saskatoon Public Schools has 1 or 2 elders serving 47 schools, almost, I guess about 45. They do have some really committed Indigenous programs, but there's less access to elders, there's less access to knowledge keepers. One benefit to being in the city is that lots of those purchasing issues, lots of the grocery and the shopping issues that Tammy mentioned are non-existent in the city. It's much easier to get both commercial deliveries, to have your staff go to the grocery store to pick up things, and to get business donations about food. And then there's a bit more administrative red tape we found in the city. Just larger scale school divisions, working with more students, and so the rules are a little bit stricter. For example, one school wanted to put in some Saskatoon berry and Haskap berry bushes, and they got permission from their principal, and then they got permission from their superintendent. And then when they were just on the verge of making it happen, facilities stepped in, and facilities said, absolutely not, no berry bushes on school grounds. So there's just a whole different layer of administration that you often have to deal with a city school. So we ran into some of those things. As I said, we did do some intervention in terms of just improving meal programs. And we did do a little bit of intervention in terms of bringing traditional food into those meal programs. So that looked mostly like having elders and community members prepare community feasts. One school did a traditional Métis feast with a bullet soup and bannock and tea. One school had a wild rice incorporated into their feast. We added a couple of small bits to the menu, like again, wild rice. One school had some local berries that were Saskatoon berries that were harvested that were donated to the school to be incorporated into the meal program. So it was a little bit of putting traditional food into the schools, but for the most part, what we really relied on was the food literacy piece. So really great school food programs have curriculum integrated food literacy learning. And that's where we saw the cultural pieces really shine with the Saskatoon schools. So can you move the slide, Miss Tammy? So gardening, again, one of the schools has a traditional, they're located on the site that used to be a traditional Métis garden. Um, and so they've got a really great gardening program. They were engaging students. They were learning companion planting and these kinds of things. We did lots of trips to gardenscapes, and the CHEP Good Food in Saskatoon has a really great community garden and a traditional gardening program called a ski. And we took the students there to learn to sort of tour the garden and experience what it's like to harvest your own food. And again, about pollinators and companion planting and all those kinds of things, food system stuff. One of our schools developed a really great relationship with an elder, and that they helped them to put in a traditional plants garden. So right out front of their school, a really small plot of native plants and traditional medicines. And their elder comes in and as part of their arts program, sits with the kids and does storytelling and tea. And that program has developed away from food so that the elder brought in an extra knowledge keeper who's now teaching hoop dance, and the kids are really engaging in all sorts of beading and traditional arts that they weren't before. And it all started with the food programming, so that's really cool. They brought in a theater production that was all about traditional food from Haida Gwaii. Next slide, Miss Tammy. There was tons of opportunities to engage students in cooking. The after school cooking club, which we worked with CHEP Good Food to put that together for the kids, was a great opportunity to teach cooking skills and get kids familiar with being in the kitchen. The one school that has a very diverse immigrant population, they had parents come in and teach about their traditional foods and tell their traditional stories and share their favorite baked goods. And the kids did some classroom cooking. They had a toaster oven, and they made desserts with their parents, which was really cool. With some pemmican and jam making, taste testing of traditional pemmican and different fruits and berries and those kinds of things. One of the high school classes is a commercial cooking class. They did an entire unit on wild rice. They went out to Wanuskewin and did a tour of the land and looked at traditional plants that would have been used as food sources. Then in the classroom, they learned about salting and smoking and fermenting and canning and traditional ways of storing food. It was like a whole unit that was really focused on traditional knowledge. And then a little bit of land-based learning, mostly around field trips, visiting Wanuskewin and Brightwater. They did a little bit of learning about the bison herd out at Wanuskewin, which was really great. So if you're looking to really bring traditional food into the school, one great way to do it is through food literacy learning. And so I would recommend sort of budgeting for that, providing money for transportation and for bringing in elders and guests and visitors and experts, and engaging as many of the kids as you can. Because oftentimes in the city schools, they can't have a culture day. They just have, one small group of students or one classroom of students gets to have this wonderful knowledge. And I think it's worth engaging all the kids in the school, or as many as you can. So that's a little bit about the urban perspective. And if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end. But I want Barb to have lots of time to talk about their great land-based learning initiatives. Thank you.
Sorry, microphone. Hi, thank you for inviting our school community to come into this conversation on school food programming. It's pretty exciting to hear what's happening and what can happen in provincial schools. Slide. So we started pretty simple in that like most schools likely where we just had snacks in the back of a classroom for any kiddo who needed it. And then we saw a pretty strong need in our community
for fresh fruit, especially. Like we are at the end of the road. Getting fresh fruit up here is super expensive. And we ended up having to focus in the beginning around apples, oranges, bananas, because those were the ones that would transport the best and would keep the best. But kiddos were at least getting a piece of fresh fruit every morning and every afternoon. And then the program slowly developed in that we were seeing kids coming to school hungry in the morning. So we started with in-class breakfast kind of programs for if any kids who just wanted it. So there would just be toast and jam and cereal at the back of the classroom and milk. And if you were hungry, you had a snack and had some breakfast. Um, from that, and talking with the kids, um, having access to a hot breakfast was starting to be important to them. And also that universality that Tammy talked about. They didn't want it to be that they felt like anybody was being targeted or isolated, or they wanted it to be open and they wanted it to be community based. So slide. This is part of what Tammy was talking about looking for community or looking for funds. So we are consistently applying for different grants to fund this program. But we do have a hot breakfast buffet program, and the kids and the teachers got together and decided what that would look like. So our kiddos come in, they go through the buffet. And then they go back to their classrooms. And so, what would traditionally be like a carpet time in most people's classrooms is now like a family breakfast. So, the class sits together as a family. They chit chat about like what happened last night, what's going on today. And they do that kind of carpet time conversations and family conversations around breakfast in the morning. And it just allows them to connect before they start their school day. And so that was already a part of our programming before Tammy and Stephanie and their program came up north. The other thing we had started doing, slide, is looking for better ways to get fresh food in our northern community. And so we started garden towers and a school community garden. And we were really lucky and prosperous. We got a greenhouse. We were able to get potatoes and carrots and all your like root vegetables to last in our school community till about the end of October, mid-November. So it took a pretty good chunk off of the table for our food budgets, which was really great. Our garden towers, any herbs or anything like that, any lettuces that we needed, we grew all that. And it was quite successful. And that developed into some school learning programs. Slide. So we had our grade 7, 8s, and 9s now do an options class throughout the year. It lasts about 3 months where they're learning about food sustainability. They're learning about cooking and cooking the things they like in a more healthy way, and that type of thing. We've offered commercial cooking every 3 years up here now, so that we have a fairly small school population. It means that every high school student has at least one commercial cooking class before they leave here. So they have a really good firm grasp of just different food literacy, really. And as well, we have an after school food cooking club for our grades 4, 5s, and 6s, our junior high and our high schools. So they run at different times throughout the year. And they actually, during that time, try and look at, so like Stephanie was saying, we have a pretty homogeneous population. So during those clubs, they tend to look at foods from other places across the world, and try and see what interests them and what they can incorporate in their diet. And it's been really good because it's also allowed us to make changes in our school lunch program that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Slide. Um, so like Tammy was saying, we're really lucky. We're like in the bush. So we're really lucky in that we can harvest traditional foods off the land on a fairly regular basis. So one of the things that we do here is we do blueberry pick, and then we use those blueberries and we can them and make jam and can them. And it lasts, this year was a bad blueberry harvest, so it only lasted us like about a month. But last year we're still serving blueberry jam in our breakfast program till not quite May. So we made it almost all the way through April. So again, it's just something that's allowing us to spend our budget dollars somewhere else. And it's giving the kids the opportunity to get out on the land and actually harvest the food, but also process it. So they get to go through the whole process from harvesting to production to consumption, which is they find pretty interesting. Slide. We also have pretty strong land-based programming. So like the next few slides are just different things that we tend to harvest through our land-based programming. And it's ducks, it's rabbits, ptarmigan, partridge, slide. Um, we have moose that we do a fall moose camp, but we also have community who donate. And like Stephanie said, like we do have the luxury of having strong connections to the people who are donating the food, so we know exactly what their food harvesting practices are and can support that. And then the students themselves actually end up processing most of the meat after the harvest. And again, it's that worldview of using the whole animal. So in this one, you can see in the bottom right corner, they even did the hide, and the group, that hide that they're doing there, they're currently making mitts with that hide. That was a moose that was donated in the fall. Slide. Most of these pictures are around the bison harvest that Tammy was able to connect our school with, which the kids found super neat because bison aren't up here. So it was an incredible experience for them. And now they're like, it provided a great deal of meat for our school food program, but again, it provided them with opportunities to try a new meat source that they can do the similar things with in their own like traditional recipes. So that was really interesting for them to see that. And as you see in these pictures, the kids are a part of the whole process. Slide. So in this next one, they are smoking fish. So that fish, moose tend to be our big ones that we have in our programming. The kids do also operate a trap line, so they do get some meat there. And then moose tends to be things that are donated. Same with ducks. But fish, they create dry fish, they create pemmican, and it's used in the school. It's also given out into the homes because some of these things, especially dry fish and pemmican, we're seeing less frequently in the homes, just because the amount of time and effort it takes to go out and gather all the fish and smoke it. It's not happening as much in our community at a family level, but they still really enjoy those. They're more delicacies now. And so the kids just feel super honored to be able to take these home and give them to their grandmas and grandpas and share that with them. So it's pretty incredible. The two boys in the bottom middle are actually, the fire got cut off, but cooking fish on the fire. We do a lot of outdoor fish fries, outdoor cooking over a grill and an outdoor fire. Um, and they, as part of the experience, they love it. Slide. So we get them involved as low as we can, especially blueberry picking. Like we go right down to the kindergartners. And all the kiddos get to participate in eating the items. Um, oh, okay, I have to leave you time for questions, so I'm going to speed through the rest. Um, so yeah, they knife work, like they come in and watch older kids doing it over a period of time, and then they become that little bit of an older kid, and they're supporting someone do it, and then they actually get to be able to use the knives themselves. So it's kind of like a progression of learning from our littles to our bigs, which we have the advantage of being a nursery to grade 12 school. So it allows for that kind of lifelong learning. Um, these are just some of our kiddos enjoying some food. It's been a really long time since they've eaten ptarmigan. So some of these kids are eating ptarmigan, and some of them are actually eating moose heart. And heart is a delicacy here. So it's something that's not often donated. And someone was donated it. So it was the first time some of those kiddos had eaten it. And so there's a lot of smiles. They really enjoyed it. Slide. As such, it's made our kids want to be wary of the environment and their environment. They now want to be able to do these things with their kids in the future. So our land-based programming has created partnerships with different universities around um, actually throughout Canada to study the environmental impacts of uranium mining up here. Just because we do have a lot of development happening in our area, and the kids are involved as well in all of those studies. So you see some kiddos here out dip netting for different little water bugs and searching through and classifying them, so that they went to the Canadian nuclear laboratories to see what the levels of uranium are in the lower end of the food chain. Then we did our partnership with U of S, and we did a lunch study and found our kids really wanted a lunch program. They wanted a lunch program that featured these traditional foods. From our land-based program, we had been able to offer a traditional meal like once a month sort of thing as a feast. So we'd have a feast once a month. But they wanted that more often. And it was really great through that partnership to hear the kids' voices about what they wanted. Like they wanted a lunch program similar to our breakfast program, so they could come back after lunch and sit together as a class and meet and talk. They also still wanted to have a lunch break time, because lunch is like the big meal here. But they needed access to healthier foods. So they wanted to be able to break and go home and see their families and connect as a family, but then still come together and have access to good, healthy meals. Slide. The program did give us, like Tammy highlighted, one of the major issues we have is storage. So we were able to get a walk-in freezer that was super helpful. And slide, it gave us access to money for a grocery unit, which is almost up and running. So I'm looking forward to having all that lettuce. And in the end, helped us get our lunch program. So currently we offer, again, a buffet style warm lunch. Kids walk by it, pick up what they need, head to class, have that conversation. And then anything that's left over gets put in takeout containers, and on their way out, they just walk by the buffet. And if a kiddo needed something for supper, they pick something up off the buffet and just take it home with them. So it's worked out really great. And that's us in a nutshell.
Wow, thank you so much. That was all incredibly fascinating and captivating to watch and listen to. The time flew by. Um, we have about 10 minutes right now for any questions from the audience here. So feel free to raise a hand or put your question in the chat. See one in the chat. Okay, so we have one question here. So from Jordan, this is for Barb. So, did you have to go through any licensing or inspections to grow produce for your food program? We've looked at doing buffet style service, but admin is concerned about food safety and our kids contaminating food. Have you seen any of these issues? So I guess the first one is, did you have to go through any licensing or inspections to grow produce for your school food program?
So this is where the luxury of being in a federal school on a federal reserve is a little bit helpful. We've started to develop like a policy around it, and same with a policy around wild meat. But there's not a lot of food or a lot of hoops we have to jump through. It's like, oh yeah, it came from John, you're good. Um, so yeah, like the red tape that Stephanie was talking about is definitely going to be a challenge in some larger cities. Um, but around, so our buffet, we actually have teaching assistants that serve at the buffet so that there isn't issues with contamination or anything like that. It also makes sure on days where we get to have something that's a little bit candy-ish like bacon, that kids don't take an entire plate of bacon and everybody gets a little bit. And that's helped with that. And it's allowed it so that the kids, like we actually had to go through a school evaluation recently, and the evaluator was shocked that there was no waste. Like kids with the support of that teaching assistant at the table are taking exactly what they want to eat. And so there's very little waste, and it's been a really good experience that way.
Thanks so much, Barb. I'm just so impressed with everything you've accomplished and how involved the students are. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing and thanks for answering my questions.
While we still have Barb on the line here on the hotspot, one more question for Barb right here. Where did your school food program get funding from? Or how is it funded?
I think she might be frozen, Kaylee. It looks,
I
yeah.
was like, am I frozen or is she?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see if she comes back and we'll see if we can address that. There's another one from Dakota. This was great, thank you. I'm wondering if any of the panelists can speak to the subject of Indigenous school food curricula to accompany the school food program.
I can speak a little bit to that in terms of um, created curriculum. There's a couple of resources available online that are really great. BC Ministry of Education, Teach Food First, has some great resources that I would highly recommend in terms of like Indigenous cultural learning. And we have our team from the University of Saskatchewan is coming out with a food literacy guide for educators. It's supposed to be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and I think we might be talking about it later in the food series. Yes, Kaylee, is that true? I mean, we can, but it has in it, there are links to some other great resources in terms of Indigenous knowledge and culture and connecting that directly to curriculum in places that you might not expect it to connect. So that's another resource that I would recommend, but it's not coming out for a couple of weeks. So you'll just have to hold your breath a little bit for that.
Did any of the other panelists want to comment on that question?
I'll just say that I know that a lot of the schools teachers were working on their own connections, so they would be looking for how can we take the seasonal practices and traditional practices of the fall, winter, and spring, and then build them into the curriculum. So I know a lot of the teachers were working on that themselves and just making those connections and working hard at kind of taking that seasonal practice and then having the curriculum support it.
Thank you for that addition. We have another question for Barb or Tammy. Are the communities able to tie into commercial fishing operations for supply? Is there any mushroom harvesting?
In one of our surveys, we did ask about some of the favorite traditional foods that students would identify, and I would say that I think the top foods were berries as well as moose meat. And so the local garden vegetables, the berries, and the moose meat were the sort of the top three, if I can recall. We did ask about mushrooms, and there wasn't much response on mushrooms. So they're more of I know there's a lot of people that pick mushrooms, but it's more of a economic development thing, I think. And we didn't see a lot of demand to include that in the school food program.
I will say about the fish situation, we were sort of expecting the northern kids to give us a positive view of fish, just because, they got fishermen in the family and they're sort of living it. But the highest response to I'd like to try fish was actually the new Canadian kids in Saskatoon, who I guess eat fish at home quite often and enjoy it. So there's lots of opportunity to do some fish in schools, which is not something that happens very often. I don't think incorporating fish into meal programs, but there is some interest.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I'll throw out a question that I have. So from some recent surveys that I was working on through the SSBA, there was a sort of an overall identified need for schools across the province and a dissatisfaction, that's not a word. They're dissatisfied with their ability to offer Indigenous and culturally appropriate foods in their schools. And this was across rural, urban communities. For schools who are just thinking about trying to begin their journey or maybe increase their ability to serve culturally appropriate foods, and or work on incorporating food literacy from Indigenous perspectives and learning, what would you offer for a starting place from what you've learned for schools who are just getting into it or need a few or who want to improve what they're doing and offering?
Because the berries were so popular and also garden produce was also popular, it's an easy place to start. You don't need to worry about any inspections. Most schools would have said that they wanted to add fruits or vegetables to their menu anyway. So that was a super easy thing to just start building a little more produce into the menu. So that, without having to worry, you could add those things. And then the other thing was that, you can get commercially inspected buffalo meat, elk meat, and fish. So those are three things to consider is if you have issues with red tape around wild meats, consider that there are these commercial fisheries and there are these bison and elk ranches, and a lot of that meat can be purchased. It just does add to the cost. But it is they are important foods. So yeah, that's what I would say if anyone wants to add to that.
I would concur. And in Saskatoon, we had a lot of success with just because like funding pemmican for 200 kids is kind of difficult. We did little taste testing. So, we bought 40 pieces of pemmican and cut them into little pieces and share them around. So I would recommend taste testing as an option. Just getting them to try new things. Like I know as a city kid, pemmican is one of those things we heard about. It's there. It's in all the stories we hear about, First Nations people in Turtle Island and what they used to eat. But I never tried it. So bringing that in for the kids was a really powerful thing. So taste testing. And then in terms of the food literacy stuff, I would say the bringing in an elder to just do tea and story time to just get kids like talking about it and thinking about traditions and protocol and how we treat an elder and making a gift and doing your land acknowledgement and all that stuff can really be brought in with just an elder visit or a knowledge keeper visit. So I think that's a great way to go as well. Although there's a little bit of cost involved in that usually. So something to think about.
Thank you. I hope that does provide some good starting places. I recognize that it's 3 o'clock and we need to wrap up. I'm just give me a second, just putting up a slide. Can you hear? Yep, you can see these. So I'd like to really provide a sincere thank you to our speakers today. I know, Barb, there was something that froze and you're gone for a minute, and there was a follow-up question around how much your program costs. So if you want to just stay on for a minute after I kind of wrap up here to answer that question. For those who can, we can stay on just for another 2 or 3 minutes. But for those that need to go, I'd just like to thank you for attending and thank you so sincerely to our speakers. We do have another session coming up March 27th. It'll be at the same time, 1:30 to 3. And our next speaker session is going to focus on spreading and scaling your school food program. So we have 3 speakers who are noted here on the slide, who are going to be sharing different perspectives on how, once we have maybe a school food program, how do we expand it and how do we do it at divisional as well as provincial levels? And I have invited the Child Nutrition Council of Manitoba to share their perspective on their provincial administration and support in Manitoba. And we also are evaluating this session. So if you do have a few minutes to scan the QR code, just to let us know any feedback about how you're enjoying the series. Do you have any suggestions for the future sessions? We only do have 2 left, but if there's some pertinent things that are coming up, we definitely will take that into consideration. And just any thoughts about school food development in Saskatchewan in general. So I'm going to leave that up just for a moment. And thank you all. If I can't see people at the moment, but Barb, if you're still there.
Hi, Kaylee, it's Shayna. We just got an email from Barb that she cannot get back in.
Okay, so sorry we
Her
can't answer that
internet
last
connection has been
question. But that's it. So thank you all very much. And we hope to see you again on March 27th. And if there are any follow-up questions, you can send me an email. And these sessions are recorded and up at the SSBA website. You can also find it just by Googling the SSBA YouTube channel, and you'll see our speaker series. So thank you again.